Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Truth About Marketing. I have Cynthia Sassi here. She's a digital publisher and marketer, running a collection of digital magazines and also co-running a marketing agency. Cynthia, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, let's go.
Perfect. All right. So first one, favorite business or marketing technology?
I have to say AI right now. There's a lot of different ways to use it, and that's probably one of my favorite things that I've been, using lately.
Perfect. Favorite social channel?
Instagram.
Good. Least favorite social channel?
Probably TikTok, just because I feel like it's so much work and I haven't really gotten into it.
Very good. Very good. A lot of people are on the fence about it. So a brand that you love?
I love Z Supply. It's a clothing company that I love, that I wear, and their account, they're like beachy and it just is like a feel good aesthetic. So I really enjoy it.
Okay. Brand that needs some help. Favorite influencer or business leader?
Gary Vaynerchuk would probably have to be. I feel like he's an influencer in his own way, and
Yep.
an OG for sure.
Absolutely. I just reposted something of his today. So,
Yeah.
brand or person you'd like to work with the most?
Maybe Gary Vaynerchuk again. He was pretty influential when I was first starting out many years ago, and so back then I feel like he really had an impact on growing my business.
Very good. Very good. All right. So not too painful there, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Give everybody kind of your background and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah. So not to date myself, but I started in the digital marketing space back in 2007, when I graduated college. Back then, Facebook was barely a thing. Instagram didn't even exist yet. Even though Facebook existed, businesses were not on it yet. So it wasn't a marketing
Right.
tool. It was simply a networking tool at that point. I got really lucky and got an internship with a digital publishing company. And so kind of got in at the ground floor and really learned what digital marketing was all about and where it was going, and got in really early. And so that really set the trajectory of my career from there. And the thing that I loved about digital marketing is that, unlike print or TV or billboards, like, you have actual data and analytics that you can look at. You can see what people are clicking, you can see what people are interested in. And so you can use all that consumer behavior data to refine what you're doing and give more of what they want. And so I found that part really fascinating, and it's what kind of made me fall in love with the space. So I've been kind of doing a mix of both digital marketing for businesses and then also digital publishing, so serving readers as well as advertisers.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, I became familiar, with some of the things that you guys have done around here, with some of the brands that you've worked with, and also, your Arizona publication. So, why don't you talk a little bit more about that and kind of how you built that from the ground up to get you where you are?
Yeah, so I first started out working with a national magazine, which was really kind of like a women's, think kind of Cosmo type stuff, like a women's magazine that was all digital. And I really liked what I learned there, but I went and worked for a local magazine for a while. And what I really loved about the local scene was getting to meet local business owners, hearing their stories. Obviously, they have a passion behind what they're doing. So it was just a lot more rewarding to work on those stories and with those advertisers, as opposed to Fortune 500 companies that are it's Target, Old Navy, P&G
Right.
brands, those sorts of things. It just wasn't as fulfilling for me to work with those brands. So I really fell in love with the local scene and thought, what if I marry that passion with all of this knowledge that I learned from the national digital magazine? And this was, of course, still early on in this industry. So, most people were still in the old school print phase and hadn't really made that transition yet into digital space. And so I thought it was a great opportunity to get involved in, doing something local on the digital side. So launched Fabulous Arizona in 2010. Yeah, and have been growing it since. So it's crazy as it's been 15 years, but we have since expanded to multiple states. We have 6 states total now. We've got contributors across the nation and a team, core team that works on all the states as well. But that's been a really, exciting project to grow that out and be able to take that localized feel into different markets and use the same processes and tools that are working for Arizona and applying those to other markets. And while doing that, obviously, I meet a lot of local business owners that need marketing help. And
Right.
so through the process, I've, met people that have hired me to help with websites, digital marketing, all of that. And in 2020, partnered with my now fiance, Ty, on building an actual agency, marketing agency, so that we can better serve, clients that we have for branding, websites, and social media marketing.
Very good. Very good. And talk a little bit about, so I kind of wanted to pause on what you said there, the national brands versus the local or small businesses, right? I'm always fascinated, and I'm kind of like you where, the national level, it's good. It's, there's money in it. That's obviously all great. But end up being way more fulfilled watching like a small business go from, hey, like we just have a few bucks and we're trying to grow. And next thing you know, they're opening more locations, right? Like that to
Mhm.
me is really fulfilling. So you talked a little bit about like, hey, I took some of what was national into local, and talk a little bit more about kind of what some of those things are that apply, because I think there's a lot of small business owners, entrepreneurs, et cetera, that are really interested in like, what can I do to kind of help my business out, even though I don't have those big budgets and I don't have the resources that some of these other companies do.
Yeah. Well, are you speaking in terms of how to, use those same, like what kind of tools would be applied to other markets
I think
or
it would be
just,
tools, strategies, just anything that you think or that you've seen. Like, I could give you an example that where like email marketing, certain
Mhm.
campaigns, things can be very valuable to a small business, the same way that it is to a large business. The difference is more about the content and the ability to, again, you're collecting emails, you're growing your database, you're actually,
Mhm.
gaining more like active followers of said business. Whereas at the high level, when they have an email list of 1 million, it's just a numbers game at that point. You know what I mean? Like very different tactics when you're talking about the same thing, but just a different way to approach it.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many small businesses I meet that don't have email marketing, and I love that you brought that up because this is one of my favorite things to talk about, because obviously when I started out in 2007, email marketing was a huge thing. Social media didn't exist yet. That wasn't a marketing channel. So it was really all email at that point. And then when social media came on the scene, people started forgetting about email, and it was assumed to be an archaic form of marketing. What I think recently a lot of people are realizing is that still a very valuable tool. And as far as I'm concerned, especially with how noisy social media has gotten, I feel like email marketing is probably the most valuable tool, aside from perhaps maybe, apps that are pushing notifications directly to your phone, or, I think text message people are finding is really invasive and annoying.
Yep.
So I feel like email marketing is kind of that, middle ground where, having that email list is so valuable. And, the thing that people forget about is we don't own these followers that we have on these social accounts.
Right.
So if your account were to get hacked or something were to happen, like with the TikTok ban, where TikTok could have maybe gone away, you then lose that entire audience. You don't own those people. So by collecting
Right.
email addresses, you own those email addresses. That's something that, you have forever, no matter what happens on these social accounts, and can continue to market to those people.
Yeah, which obviously we saw with TikTok, people all of a sudden
Yeah.
lost their minds because if you predicated your whole business on TikTok and it went away, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, I mean, same thing. There's even some restaurants that they don't have a website, and that's crazy to me.
Yep.
These are things that I feel like, they think that they can just live on these platforms like Yelp or Facebook or something, and that'll be enough. But it's so important to have something that you own, your website, your email addresses.
Yeah. So elaborate a little bit more on that. Cause it's very, obviously I run a marketing agency myself, but the idea being that there's a lot of people that seem to think that social media is just like the end all be all. Well, if I do good and I make good content, and it's like, you don't even understand the idea that you make a good piece of content on organic social media, it still might not even get seen by anybody. Like, so then you get into the whole world of advertising versus boosting posts versus organic versus influencer, like all of this stuff, right? So talk a little bit about the importance of websites or web design even, and having a good foundation, especially for a small business.
Yeah, I mean, branding and having a good looking website, it kind of is like your resume, if you will. So if people are researching you, they're going to end up on that website or end up on, these different platforms looking at your account. So having cohesiveness, having a brand consistency across all these different platforms is so important. The website exists to house all of, your menus, your contact information, the hub. I feel like you
Right.
have to have that, and then everything else gets built around that. So I feel like that's so important. It also helps with, if you are doing social ads or any other ads, retargeting. You can, install those pixels on your websites that if people are coming there and they're leaving, you can retarget them. I can't tell you how many times as a consumer I go and shop for something, and then I go on a different website, and now I'm getting ads for that thing I
Yep.
was just shopping for. So it's a really powerful tool, but if you don't have a website to, use to house all that stuff and have those tracking pixels and the retargeting abilities and a place to collect email addresses even, that all needs to be there. And I think, with, like I said, with the social media, I feel like people have really kind of think that it's something that they can skip, or it's not essential if they're trying to, be budget conscious.
Right.
And I just feel like it's something that is essential and should not be cut in the budget and, find a way to make that work.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. So, and then again, talk a little bit more about kind of the differences now that you saw when you went from the national brands to the smaller brands. Like, what kind of stuck out to you? I mean, again, we just touched on website and whatnot, but other than that, like, is there anything else that, people kind of overlook or they're not paying attention to, or areas where just overall it's kind of a misnomer or people just, they need to know that they need to pay attention to that?
Well, I think there's obviously very, very different strategies coming from a small business versus a larger business. A lot of times, these larger brands are simply trying to get brand awareness, maintaining their brand in front of people. Whereas a small business, they're looking for feet through the door that day. Like it's very, it's a different mindset there. They need to see the dollar return, a
Right.
dollar on dollar return there, and as far as clients coming in the door. So I think the strategy is going to be very different if you're doing brand awareness versus, trying to get conversions that you can track. So I really think that's something that smaller businesses I found overlook because it's kind of like the shiny object thing.
Right.
They see these influencers or brands that have these, big followings, and they're so excited to work with them because it's such great exposure. But is it the right people? Especially as a local brick and mortar business, someone might have 1 million followers, but how many of those followers are actually in the vicinity of your business to walk in the door?
Yep.
And that's something that I think gets lost very quickly with a lot of the smaller local businesses. If you're a national brand, great. You
Right.
can, sell and ship, around the world.
Yep.
That's totally makes sense. But if you're like a restaurant, for example, with a brick and mortar in a specific, location, unless somebody's visiting you, they're or visiting that city, they need to live within, 10, 15 miles of that location. And so really understanding, like, you might even want to work with like micro influencers, and that's that way, that are very targeted to the specific, location of where your business is, finding ways to target people that are in the right place. So it's quality over quantity for sure.
And I literally just had a post about that today. I basically was saying that, look, I would take like 100 diehard, avid micro influencers over some person that just has, 1 million followers that could be anywhere in the world, could be fake, could be this, could be that. And, or they're just not, they're kind of polarizing figure, whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
The idea being that those big macro influencers or celebrities, if you will, again, they're scattered all over the country. They have, little pockets here and there, but then they haven't built up that trust. They're just recognizable. That's it, right? Like
Hmm.
that's their kind of brand. Whereas if I live in Scottsdale and I know of like a few local people who are in the nightlife scene or they're in the restaurant scene, or I'm going to keep going to them because I always trust their opinion, right? So like actually,
Hmm.
like you said, I'm a quality over quantity guy 1 million times over. So definitely something that I think about. But moving kind of into another direction of that though is brand, right? The look and feel of a brand. I think it's super important. I think you guys, at least the brands that you guys work with, do a really good job of it. It's super important to like, you can design a website, you can have a social aesthetic, you can have all that, but it's really important for a brand to be true to who they are. And we were just talking about this earlier that like, hey, posting content and maybe somebody tags you, but the person that tagged you, the content wasn't really on brand for you. Do you feel like you have to repost it? Should I be reposting everything? So talk a little about like brand and how important it is to stay true to your brand, especially again as a smaller business.
Yeah, we have kind of like a portfolio of restaurants right now on the agency side, and we have Cafe Monarch, which is probably one of the most prestigious fine dining establishments in the Scottsdale area.
Yep.
And then we also have like Over Easy, which is a fun, bright brunch spot. So very different, approaches there, different audiences, and very different styles for the brand. But we want to, make sure that we're being very consistent. There's a lot of like basics and tools that can be used for both, but as far as the kind of content that we're putting out, it has to be consistent and, fit with that particular brand. So with Over Easy, for example, we can be kind of funny and goofy and do some like fun trends and, some of that goofy stuff that you see that goes a little viral. Whereas with Cafe Monarch, we're going to want to be very luxury and very clean and crisp, and kind of so people can see like this is what you would expect coming in here, is this
Right.
very elevated dining experience. So we really have to make sure that everything we're posting is conveying that. So, sometimes if people tag us and stuff that isn't, maybe something doesn't look quite right, or it's not. And for me, I'm more looking for like, does the plate look like it should?
Right.
Is everything the way, like from that perspective, does the food look appetizing? Because sometimes people just have crummy cameras or poor
Sure.
lighting, and the food just doesn't look appetizing. It's like, oh, we don't want to share that because that's
Yep.
not representative of what we would serve. So paying attention to that kind of stuff. So if it's something that it's like, we can't really repost this, we always engage with them. Thank
I
you
was
so
gonna
much for
say,
coming
yeah,
in.
that's
Yeah, like
great.
you can
Like
always
just a
engage with them
DM.
without actually reposting it. But
Yeah.
obviously, if it's something that looks great, yeah, we'll repost it. We almost never accept collab tags unless it's something that was like discussed in advance, because the grid is so important. And much like your website, your grid is kind of like your resume.
Yep.
People are, when they're researching places to go or researching a product, they're going to go to that landing page and be scrolling through. So that's where, you need to make sure that like you're visually showing what people should expect. And if there's one thing that looks like really out of place, it's a little jarring. So, it's very rare that we accept collab tags, but, obviously sharing stories is, it's going to be gone in 24 hours. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but we do like to just make sure that everything looks the way it should.
Yeah, and I think the other thing though too, you mentioned, kind of expectation versus reality, right? Like, and listen, Cafe Monarch, it's not going to be everything to everybody, right? It's an establishment. It's
Mhm.
usually like a nice occasion. It's fancy. It's more expensive. Like, so you're not going to want to portray as if like anybody can come here and it's not going to be expensive,
Mhm.
because then someone gets there and it's like way out of their budget, or they're not dressed appropriately, or right. So it's not a matter of like discluding people. It's more about just setting the right expectation for, hey, this is what you're going to get when you come here, right?
Right.
That one restaurant, excuse me, the one restaurant Dick's is probably a perfect example of it, where like they treat you like crap at the restaurant, and like if you didn't know, you'd walk in there and be like, what is going on? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like they do a very good
That's their
job of like, hey,
brand.
when you get there, you're gonna get shitty service.
Yeah. 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 For
So
sure.
it's super fun, but it's important that people definitely understand your brand and who you are and kind of that whole deal.
Well, and I think some marketers jump on all these trends that
Mm-hmm.
they, oh, there's this big trending thing, we're going to do that. But it's not always the right fit for the brand. And
Right.
so I caution people with that, of like, doing this one thing that maybe might get some views because it was trending, but it's so off brand that it just doesn't really benefit the business.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And you want to jump on those and you want to be a part of it, but there's so
But you got
many
to pick the
things.
right ones.
Well, and there's so many things that happen every day. So the two kind of with our clients, what I would say is either A, you pick and choose them, right? Because
Hmm.
like there's so much that happens every day. There's some that are going to work for you and some that don't. The other way is that you fully adapt whatever that trend is to you, right? Like
100%.
if there's a way that you want to jump on this, but we can adapt it to us or put our spin on it, fine. But like
Yep.
going out of your way or just trying to grasp onto a trend is just not the way that you build a brand these days. At least, that's what we advise our clients. So
Yeah, definitely.
for sure. So, moving beyond, I mean, we talked a lot about like small businesses and things like that, but when it comes to kind of growth stage, right? So now they're expanding or maybe it's multi-location. Talk a little bit about the strategies that change as you go from like one location to now two or three or four. Like what's your kind of approach to helping businesses grow through that?
Yeah, I mean, when it's one location, I like to really hyper focus on like, the correct geotags, hashtags, those types of things that are like really localized to that one location. Obviously, once you start having multiple locations, it gets a little trickier. Now
Right.
you can't be targeting things specifically to that one area. So being mindful of that, over Easy, for example, they've got 17 locations in Arizona now and are looking to
Wow.
expand outside of the state. So we're actually now kind of already discussing as they, because all the 17 are owned by the same, by corporate.
Wow.
And they are, starting to franchise. And so then comes in, do we let the franchisees have their own accounts? And, what if it goes out of state? How does that start affecting, how we will be doing the corporate account and, how we, geotag things. So currently right now, we're using a lot of like Arizona focused, verbiage that'll obviously have to change as it expands more, but we try to like use, different geotags for each post. All the locations obviously have their own geotags, so we'll do different locations throughout the month for each of the posts, so that it's kind of, people, it could come up for somebody that's in Gilbert just because it's geotagged to Gilbert. So we try to make sure that we're making sure to give some love for all different parts of the area, but, being mindful of that, of, when you're picking influencers to work with or the type of content that you're posting, obviously, it's going to be a big difference between you have a few locations in the valley or you have a few locations throughout the state, because obviously then Tucson and Flagstaff, even though they're still in Arizona, they're very different
Right.
and,
Oh, absolutely.
totally different markets. And then if you start getting into different states, it's totally different states. And we've obviously have seen this through building Fabulous Media Group. We've got states in the Midwest, Washington, like they're so different from Arizona. And so understanding that these markets are so different and you're speaking to people differently, you really have to keep that in mind when you start, expanding to other areas.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. I think people kind of lose track of that. They try to stay true to the brand, but it's like, again, same thing. There's a way to be true to the brand, but also kind of speak the language of the people that you're targeting, or again, your ideal customer profile, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like, hey, now I'm in, Minnesota or Chicago or whatever if you start moving Midwest, right? So that's really important. Talk a little bit more about, you just mentioned influencers. And I think this is something today that a lot of people are super interested in, whether, again, it's a consumer brand going through TikTok shop, or you have a long-term influencer that's kind of like a brand advocate. What are kind of your best practices or do's or don'ts when it comes to influencers?
Well, I think, like I said, like I talked about a little bit earlier, is understanding the influencer's audience and not just going off of how many followers do they
Right.
have. So, really understanding, are they the right age demographic? Are they the right, in the right location? Getting that information, especially if you're paying them, that should be, number one, you're getting that information to make sure they're the right fit. I think that it's well worth, if it's the right person, well worth paying influencers. And I also think that using influencers for, user generated content that you can then use on your platform is super
Right.
valuable. And that's becoming a really, really big trend right now, is using influencers to create content for businesses' accounts. A lot of these, even micro influencers or people that don't have that many followers, some people are just really good at creating content, and they are, being paid just to create content that the business can then use on their own social account, not even necessarily on the influencer's account. And it's a recognizable face that people might, depending on who it is, people might recognize them. So if it's on your account and people are scrolling and seeing their face in the feed, it might cause them to stop and, pause on
Right.
that. So there's a lot of different ways to use influencers. The user generated content is, really getting big right now. And I think a great use of influencers, a good use of spending money. I mean, if you think about all the different ways that we can spend ad dollars, obviously it's getting more and more competitive on buying social ads and all of that. So, getting influencers in the mix, I think is key.
So I'm curious your take on this too, because I think one of the biggest kind of misnomers, if you will, is that, oh, I'm going to do this affiliate program and they'll get, they'll use a code and they get 15% off, or they get 15% of the sale. Right. So,
Mm-hmm.
but what I've always found fascinating that businesses or business owners don't understand is, if I sell a product that's $30, right, and uh, if I sell a product that's $30 and then they're getting a 15% cut of said sale, right? So they're going to get what, like 450 off of that sale. That's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of product that they have to sell through their link to make it worth it for them, right? So
Yep.
when we go back to talking about micro influencers and things like that, I've always said that I think it's really important to go with each influencer. It's like a case by case basis, right? Like, you're going to have some where it's like, hey, I'll pay you $200 a month and you need to do, or $500 a month, whatever it is, but you need to do X amount of posts, X amount of stories, and that's the contractual agreement. There
Mm-hmm.
are other ones that have hundreds of thousands of followers where you go, hey, here's a link, and whatever you sell, I can keep like we have a system to keep track of it, and we'll pay you out on those sales. But talk a little bit about like what people should look for when it comes to that. 'Cause I'm curious on your take of like whether one or the other is better, or if, again, how you approach that.
I think, like you said, it's got to be case by case basis. I think it depends not only on that particular influencer, but on that particular business.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times people have told me that they went and bought something that I had a affiliate link for that they didn't use. And they saw it on my page, thought it was cool, went and Googled it or found it on Amazon instead of going directly to the source to buy it. That happens all the time. And so I find that difficult to navigate, because you can't really, it's hard if you're paying somebody just on that affiliate link. I mean, maybe there's like some kind of split that might make sense where, hey, we're paying you this amount for the brand awareness that you're creating. And then, and additionally, this affiliate link. I don't know if you heard about that whole crazy thing with, I think it was, what was that app? The Honey app or whatever that, finds promo links for you or
Oh,
promo
yeah,
codes
yeah,
and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And apparently, what was happening is influencers were putting their promo codes out. And if someone had that installed in their browser, if someone went to that website, the honey link or whatever would override the
Oh,
influencer's affiliate link or promo code. So it was like, so these people were sending these influencers were sending people to these websites and they weren't getting any credit for it.
that's a
So
bummer.
so I just feel like there's so many nuances and it's very tricky. I mean, as much as digital is, a great way to like track over anything else, there's still, value in just the brand awareness, especially if it's something that someone may not buy like right now. If someone's going to go to a restaurant, yeah, sure, they might decide I'm going to go there this weekend. But if somebody's looking to purchase something, that they want to research, like a computer or something, a higher ticket item that they're going to want to research and think about, or maybe it's just they don't need it at that particular time, but then, down the line, they're going to, oh, I remember when, Cynthia posted about this one thing, and then they go and, buy it months or a year later or
Right.
something. So it just makes it really tricky. So I think, again, like you said, case by case basis, depending on what the business is and who the influencer is.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me, I mean, I don't know, maybe you have some stories to share with us, but like maybe tell us about some like a campaign or something that was, you took a huge risk and it worked. And then maybe there's another one where it took a huge risk and it didn't work. Like these are always good for people to learn and just experience something else that maybe we've done. So I'm very curious if you have some good examples.
Oh gosh. I'm trying to think. I feel like I'm trying to think if I have anything specific. I will say that I feel like sometimes a lot of businesses try to do too much at the same time. And the biggest thing that I feel like we need to think about as marketers is, which I feel like the business owners don't necessarily think this way. So as marketers, we have to, make sure our clients are aware of this, is that people can only receive so many messages at once. And so if you have too many different promotions going on at the same time or back to back promotions, it just becomes a lot of noise and people are not going to get that one message. So I feel like we've done things where we've launched some kind of promotion, but then it was like, oh, but we also want to mention this, this, or this. And then it's
Right.
like, okay, well, then we send it out and it kind of flops because, there's just too many calls to action and too much going on. We come across this a lot on Fabulous Media Group where our advertisers are like, well, we want to promote everything. And I'm like, that's great, but we kind of need to focus on like one thing, because then it's asking our audience to do too many things and they're probably not going to do any of them
Right.
at that point. So I feel like that's something that like we've run into that a few times where we'll launch something and it ends up being a flop because there was just too many messages and too many calls to action.
Yep. And then is there something where you're like, this is, for every business or every client, like we've seen this really work?
There have been some of our clients where we've turned on email marketing where they've never done email marketing before, where it was like a huge boost for them. So that was something, a lot of these companies, they already have, their POS already contains all of that information. They just have
Right.
never marketed to them before that way. And it we would have like reservations through the roof because people had never received an email from them before and they were all just sitting there waiting to be spoken to and they just didn't even think to do that. So that would probably be one example.
For sure. And obviously you said you're a big like Gary Vee fan and stuff like that.
Mhm.
A big thing that marketers in general, and again, it could be your Hormozy, your Gary Vee, like any of these guys, they talk about this irresistible offer, right? So like what is something, because I always have this is something that I have a hard time with because I always feel like, God, we're giving away the farm here. Like, or 50% or 40% off this sale is like, especially for a small business. However, like over time, from a data driven perspective, you go, okay, but I'm getting them in the door. How much is that email worth? And then if they buy again, or if they're a repeat customer, that their lifetime value, like all that comes into play. But like tell us a little more like how you feel about the whole irresistible offer thing and how you guys utilize it.
I think that there's a way to do it because obviously I was actually in a mastermind group I'm in. We had this conversation with one of the women in the group. She's a lawyer, so she has, pretty pricey services.
Sure.
And she was talking about giving something, she didn't want to give something away for free because that felt cheap. And also, will they then be able to afford her regular
Right.
services? So we were like, how do you find something that fits what that clientele is going to be? Because I feel like when you give somebody a really steep discount the first time, they're going to want to keep getting that stupid discount. Are they necessarily going to be that person that's going to pay full price ever? So that's where you kind of have to find that balance. And I think it depends on what it is. Our solution with her was, giving something away at a lower price point. So she's not giving anything away for free, but it's like, hey, you're getting this thing that's small so that I can show you, that you like this or that you need this or that you want this. And now you're willing to invest that larger amount. So I think there's a way to do it that gives them a taste and, gets them in the door without giving them too much of a discount to where they're never going to want to pay full price. And I know I'm sometimes guilty of that, of like, oh, wow, I got 40% off. Like,
Right.
and then you go to pay full price the next time, you're like, whoa, that is so much more expensive.
I can tell you right
You're
now,
like,
I've done that with IVs. I will literally
yeah,
find every IV therapy place in the Valley that gives
yeah,
like 50% off the first time. Cause I'm like, I'm not paying $200 for an IV, but like the
yeah.
first one's 100. I'm like, yeah, no problem. So I'll just find like new IV places.
Yeah, well, and same thing with like shopping, like shopping clothes online or something like that. And then it's like you're creating new email addresses to get the
Right.
first time promo code. It's like it's good because like you said, there's value in getting that person in the database. You're paying to get that person, their information so that you can continue to market to them. But if they're not the right person, kind of like we were talking about before, if you're marketing to the wrong person, it doesn't matter, right? So
Yep.
so I think it's a case by case basis of who is your audience and what are you marketing.
And I mean, I think you talked about it earlier about just the importance of data, right? And
Mm-hmm.
understanding, which again, a lot of small businesses don't understand their numbers and don't really realize. But again, things like your cost of customer acquisition, the lifetime value, the churn rate, like all of these things where you go, hey, I know it seems like we spent a lot of money to bring this client in. Like, let's say it was, $50 to acquire that customer or whatever. But on average, our customers come back 3 times and their lifetime spend is $150. So realistically, we're still making, 2x on them, right? Because we're going to cost the 50 and make 100 over the life of their, them as a customer. That stuff's really important. I just think it gets overlooked because people are so caught up in, again, the social media, the vanity numbers, we got this many followers and this many likes. Yeah, but did they buy? Did they
Yeah.
convert? Right? Like that's what we're concerned with. But
Yeah.
you tend to get lost in the minutia or the vanity of those social media platforms and everything else, right?
Yeah, and I think that, as a social media marketer, a lot of times for us, we're growing these accounts and they just want to see those numbers going up. And it's like, for one, it's way harder now than it used to be. But two, it's again, you want to make sure it's the right people. So just, getting numbers on there that are not actual customers, they don't really matter.
Absolutely. And so I mean, I have some myself and I can share them, but like, what are some also like growth hacking tips that you would share? Like, I know again, as I'm continuing to build truth about marketing up and even, we do it with clients is like you just said, you want to get the right people following you. So like for me, organically and social on a bootstrapping thing, like we'll go in and we'll look at it's like birds of a feather, right? So
Mm-hmm.
who's already following us or who started following us in the beginning? Well, now we're going to take the account and go follow those people because there's some familiarity there. And when they see that we followed them, it's kind of, it's a trickle effect. But like, what are some other kind of growth hacking tips that maybe you have for again, smaller business or mid-sized business, whatever it might be?
Yeah, I mean that's a great tool to use, especially if you're a like product that goes online that you're looking for anyone that might have similar interests. I think that's a great idea. For us, for some of these, local brick and mortars, we might go use geotags of people that have tagged themselves in places nearby that business. So let's say for this restaurant next door, there's a hair salon. Okay, let's go see what people are going into the hair salon and find, potential people. Because obviously if they're nearby, if they frequent that area, they're more likely to come in and be a customer. So using, tactics like that of like using the geotags to find new people, and then of course influencers, collaborating with different businesses, those types of things definitely help kind of organically hack that. And then having good content. There's so much value in that mix of content because, we want to entertain. So like I think sometimes jumping on a trend that is entertaining that maybe doesn't really I guess like sell the business or the product, but it's entertaining them. It might catch somebody's attention to get them in there. And those are obviously the kinds of things that go viral. So doing really cool transitions or, something that's funny, that can be good to use, but you don't want every piece of content to be
Right.
that because again, your page is like your resume. So you also want to show like, what would people expect when they come in there? There's different, so we like to piece it together so that there's a little bit of everything, and kind of like Gary Vaynerchuk says, with the jab, 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 right hook,
Right hook. Yep.
every post can't be a sale. Like you can't be selling them in every post because you really need to think about it as the consumer. Why, as me as a consumer, why am I going to follow an account? I'm not going to follow an account because they're just posting what they sell every day. I'm going to follow. They have to provide some value to me in order for me to want to follow them, right?
Well, there's a lot of accounts like as a perfect example of that. Like Wendy's is a great one. Like I don't care to follow Wendy's because they're like I'm curious about the Baconator. Like you follow them because they're funny, right? Like they
Right.
they
Yep.
post hilarious tweets. They're always in the middle of like some
Hmm.
social controversy or whatever. So, and I think other brands and other fast food restaurants have
Hmm.
definitely taken off their lead, right? Like have
Yep.
started to get really kind of cheeky with responses, like
Yes.
get more fun. So with that, I have a good example. Like our friend Jason Jackson, who's a client here, they're a moving company, right?
Hmm.
Like the idea is that I'm not really necessarily following a moving company. And again, most people move, I think on average, it's like every 3 years to 5 years or something like that. So why would I follow a moving company? But Jason and True Move, they're here in Arizona and they pretty much, I mean, for now, right, as they continue to
Hmm.
grow, they'll still do national moves, but their home base is here. So what we've done is deployed a strategy where they're going to kind of be the base of knowledge for all things Arizona. So best neighborhoods, best restaurants, best schools,
I
best.
was gonna say that. That's yeah.
Yeah, because as a moving company, when you're moving here, like maybe you're coming from out of state, California, Chicago, whatever it is, like now I use this moving company or I heard of them. And then now I continue to follow them because I live here now and they always have such great recommendations. Well, cool. Now that
Yep.
moving company is providing value. If I just posted a bunch of things about, we're safe, we're insured, we're bonded, we're great. So is every other moving company. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like,
Yeah. So, like you said, that's providing value. So, something that, is educational or tips that, like, people can find value in year round.
right.
I know a lot of realtors do that too,
Mhm.
because obviously people are not looking for a realtor every day. But if
Right.
they're following you because you're providing information about new restaurants in the area, or information about the neighborhoods, I mean, it's a great, great tactic to use for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we covered quite a bit. Is there anything that we
Mhm.
didn't that you wanted to talk about or throw in there?
No, I think we covered a lot of it. I mean, I think, the quality over quantity is always kind of like my big thing. And, I like that we got to touch on that a couple times on some different instances.
Absolutely. And so, for the listeners or people watching out there, it's like, where can we find you? Where can we follow and get a hold of you if we need to?
Yeah, my personal Instagram is Cynthia Sassi, Sassi, not Y. And then, fabulousarizona.com if you're in Arizona, use that to go find everything going on. And Say Less Media is our marketing agency. So, we really specialize in branding and websites. Social media clients we're a little more particular on, but, we really love helping people with, creating their brand and, getting their business off the ground with their website.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for joining us. It was a pleasure, and there's a ton of value here. So hopefully everybody gets some good value out of this conversation. We really appreciate it.